Welcome everyone, especially to the Finance Council, as this is normally a Finance Council meeting. Also, the Parish Council is here and the Chapel Refreshment Committee is here. We are very glad to have Eric Atkins, who is the Director of Property Management for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. And he's here to walk with us through the Arsee report that we all have received, and just from his perspective, because we can read through it, but we don't have the perspective of a professional that has been doing this for many, many years. And so he would highlight for us what's needed, our attention, and also perhaps the priorities in which we need to attack these things. And then he would also give us a presentation on how Captial Campaign is run in the diocese. And then the third part would be question and answers. And so if you have any question, just jot it down on your paper, and then at the end of his presentation, you can ask that. Either that, or he may handle that in another way. He's a professional at these presentations, I'm sure, so he'll manage it from here. All right, welcome to you, Eric Atkins.
Thank you, Father Duke. I appreciate it. Little more background about myself. I've been with the diocese a little over 17 years now. Technically, my title is Director of Capital Projects. It changed about a year ago. So I'm focusing on design, renovation, new construction at all of our parishes and agencies throughout the diocese. Prior to the diocese, coming to work for the diocese, I practiced architecture for 20 years here in Indianapolis. So I have an architectural background. I'm a licensed architect here in the state of Indiana. But for the last 20 years, 17 years here with the Indianapolis Archdiocese, and then 3 years with the Diocese of Lafayette, I was overseeing a similar function up there. So one half of my professional career has been spent working for the church. So I feel honored to be doing that. I guess a little more background about this Arsee report. Father Duke invited me down to the parish in, I think it was September of 2019, to tour the campus. We went up in the attic, we went in the basement, we went into every crevice that you could get into here at Sacred Heart to look at the general condition of all the buildings. And from that review, I recommended that the parish conduct a facility condition assessment of the exterior of the buildings, the roofs, the exterior walls, the windows, by a design professional that's experienced in old buildings, to put together a comprehensive assessment of what's happening here on your buildings. There seemed to be a tremendous amount of water infiltration happening. These are beautiful buildings here on this campus, and it would be a great idea to preserve them and keep them functioning for the ministries that are occurring here. So I recommended several companies to the parish, and recommended that they also apply for a grant from the Center for Congregations, which is a Lilly Endowment sponsored organization, to help assist with the funding of that assessment, which they did, and were very, very successful in getting that grant. I think the Arsee report is pretty comprehensive. There's a tremendous number of pictures that go along with it, and I don't want to go through all those pictures, but I think they tell the general story of the deficiencies in the various buildings. Most of these deficiencies are related to the exterior brick envelope of the building, and I always try and encourage our parishes to address our buildings from the outside in versus the inside out. We've had many not many, but several parishes that have tried to renovate the inside of their buildings without addressing the outside of their buildings first, and they end up just wasting their money. Several here within the city I could point to specifically, but I won't point them out. But the best thing to do is try and make our buildings as weather tight and water resistant as possible from the outside before we start addressing anything on the inside. So you can walk around this building and find this church and the Friary and the connector building, and find various components where there's plaster damage, there's maybe paint peeling, and we may say, well, let's address that. Well, we need to look at the underlying causes of why we have that paint peeling, why we have that plaster blistering, why that plaster is falling apart. And most of the time it's related to water infiltration from the outside. It may be related to moisture inside the building as a result of condensation that's built up due to inadequate venting. And it just might be a result of inadequate HVAC systems. But most of what I think Arsee engineers has determined is there are some various miscellaneous things related to stormwater, as far as getting it off the building and properly away from the building. So there's some of that in this report. There's a tremendous amount in this report dealing with just the exterior facade as it relates to the brick on the exterior. The report talks about it was cleaned at some point in the past through destructive means, probably through sandblasting, which took off the outer layer of the brick, which is considered the water-resistant layer or the weather-resistant layer, and allowed that interior brick to be susceptible to changes in the climate, absorbing moisture, freeze-thaw cycles, causing that brick to deteriorate. And there's a tremendous amount of deterioration on the outside of this building, the connector, and I believe even on the Friary building. Back in the 60s and early 70s, that seemed to be the way to, well, it wasn't the way, but there was a number of folks that thought it was the way to actually clean our buildings, was to sandblast them. And it looked great initially, but they didn't realize really what they were doing. They were just destroying the building at that point. So there's a significant deterioration on the outside of this building as a result of that. The other item that Arsee reviewed and pointed out was that there was tuck pointing done on the church. And tuck pointing is replacement of deteriorating mortar between the bricks. And that's typically, when that's done, they typically cut out the old mortar and install new mortar where that old mortar was cut out. What's been done on these facilities is someone has come around and just done a cap tuck pointing. So they've taken mortar, new mortar, and smeared it on top of the mortar joints without cutting out the old joints. And that's not a good idea because that new mortar is only adhering to that old mortar, and that old mortar is crumbling to begin with. So it's begun to pop off at a number of locations. Typically, the best way to do tuck pointing is you cut out the old mortar, usually an inch deep, so you have enough space in there to get the new mortar in, and it can adhere to the surfaces of the brick on either side of that mortar joint. In some cases, you have to go deeper than that to find sound mortar, but there's good ways to do it and there's bad ways to do it. What was done here was more for aesthetic reasons and really wasn't a sound way to deal with crumbling mortar on this church. So Arsee has recommended going around in significant areas of the building and cutting out the old mortar, installing new mortar to make the building as watertight as possible. And also they've noted areas where we need to remove some of the bricks that are crumbling to the point that they can become dangerous or will become dangerous in the not too distant future. I don't think they're saying we need to replace all the outside brick, but at some point that might be necessary over the life of the church as the brick begins to crumble and deteriorate over time. All of these buildings on this campus are made up of, the walls are not just one brick thick on the outside and plaster on the inside. There are multiple widths of brick, probably 3 to 4 layers thick, and then the plaster on the inside. So the outer part of the brick is the one that's receiving, is the layer that's receiving the most amount of damage. And the inner widths are relatively intact from what they were saying, from what they were seeing. They put together this detailed report and noted in their review and even in the photographs areas where shingles are missing, where shingles are broken. Even on the church, the slate roof, there are several areas where some of the slate pieces have broken off and have slid down and are in the built-in gutters around the perimeter. It's a good thing you have built-in gutters because it's caught that piece of slate and kept it from falling onto the ground and potentially damaging or seriously hurting someone down below. So we always talk about, as I mentioned earlier, attacking the outside and then working into the inside. We also want to start at the very top of the outside and work our way down to the ground from the outside. So I would recommend from the priority list that Arsee engineers put together that we kind of look at this in the phases of, or the parts of the building. So if we take that page 11, which has the various work activities noted, I would recommend taking that list and breaking it down into 3 components: the church, the friary, and then the chapel connector building. And if you look at that list, the church, and you go down and add up those various components, it totals almost $840,000 for the church activity. And that's related to the stone masonry around the perimeter. It's the brick themselves, the slate, some terrazzo repair on the inside. There's some trusses that need to be rebuilt up in the attic that they found that are loose and are structurally unsound that need to be addressed. Louvers that need to be repaired and painted. So the church itself is a little over $840,000. The friary is almost $500,000. It's $483,000. The chapel connector is another $417,000. So all total, it's almost $1.8 million, and that includes $10,000 for the garage roof on the south side of the building. I did a brief review of this work activity they had listed here, and I put this into almost 3 different levels of activity, maybe you call it that, with the first one being addressing all the safety issues. Any loose brick or stone that's on the outside of these buildings needs to come off immediately so it doesn't fall and hit someone. Any loose slate needs to come off and needs to be addressed. The roofs, well, the supplemental truss connection up in the church attic, that needs to be addressed. The terrazzo floor, I put that as a priority number 1 just because I think it's a potentially tripping hazard. And then any roof repairs that need to be addressed to keep water out as priority number 1. So basically those first 5 items on that list would be priority number 1. And then I'd go down to the stormwater runoff drainage networking of the roof, which is about $50,000. And I believe that involves the stormwater underground, making sure it is going to where it needs to be going. And then there are other portions down there: replace the chapel connector roof shingles, parish office roof shingles, and the garage roof shingles. I listed those as priority number 1. And then I went to priority number 2, would be other issues related to the roof, whether it be some built-in gutters, there's some steeple spill-out extenders for the stormwater, attic ventilation, and insulation repairs, the bell tower louvers, repointing the bell tower masonry portions. And I wanted to start at the top, as I said earlier, and start to move our way down. And then item 3, I began looking at the friary, because that's a pretty large component of this campus, and repointing or retuck pointing all the masonry issues there, repairing windows, downspouts, repointing the chapel connector masonry, doing window repairs on the chapel connector. And then there were also some items down in the sanctuary, which was the sanctuary and nave tuck pointing, and downspout replacements on the chapel and church connector. As I said, if you add all these up, it's just shy of 1.8 million. I believe there's some other items in here that are going to drive up the cost higher than that will need to be added in. And those would be considered as I guess some inflation cost, professional fees that will need to be brought in to assemble some type of work plan that then can be used to bid out to various contractors to get some competitive bidding for the projects, various projects. And then some contingencies in there. And if you're planning on doing a capital campaign, which I assume you would be, because this is a significant amount of money to be raised, there would be some campaign expenses in there. So I took that just shy of $1.8 million and I added another 25% to it, which brought it up to almost $2.2 million, at $2,184,000. So I think you're looking at almost a $2.2 million project to address all these items that were itemized in the Arsee report. Significant, however, I think it's achievable if it's done in a phased approach and systematic manner. Yes, Father Duke.
I just want to make sure that we are on the same page here. So basically, page 11 lists in priority of what we need to do from top all the way down to the bottom. And if we follow that list, one item at a time, we'll tackle it in the right way.
Yes.
What about the roof shingles that's at the bottom?
Well, with yes and no. With the exception, I tried to prioritize this list into 3 phases. So the first 5 items I list as priority number 1, and then the 3 items toward the bottom, the shingles on the chapel connector, parish office, and garage roof, I listed as priority number 1 also. And stormwater runoff drainage network roof, all buildings, I listed that as priority number 1 also. And then priority number 2, this is not numbered, and that would have been helpful in explaining this, but I can share my list with you if that'd be helpful.
Does the cost include things like a lift that they need to get up there to get to the shingles and all that? So
Yes.
okay, so basically, if I'm looking at this cost, it says remove loose bricks and stone masonry fragment, it's $3,000. The lift would be significant cost, wouldn't it?
The lift itself is about $300 a day to rent. There's also a delivery charge for the lift itself. So it depends on how long it's here.
That was the contingency we're talking about.
Well, if I read this correctly, I believe Arsee engineers said they included that information in their order of magnitude for these costs. Would be for lift charges to actually get up there to do the work. And you have to read the last paragraph before these numbers are outlined here. They basically say this is an order of magnitude, and it's based on numbers or quotes they've received recently on similar scopes of work. So that's why I added that 25% to the total number. We don't know what costs are going to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. I will tell you right now, we are very surprised on what some of the bids are coming in at right now. They're just astronomically high on new construction, renovation work, and it's disheartening to parishes when they spend 3 years raising money and they find out they don't have enough to do the project they want to do, so they have to start cutting back. So it's always best to plan that things are going to come in higher and add some inflation to your numbers to hopefully to believe that you hopefully have enough covered there to cover those inflation costs.
Eric, we had a major project with repairing brick, and obviously there's money wasted since it's deteriorating again. And the cost went well over what it was supposed to be. And one reason is they had a lift here, and they were charging us every day for the lift, but they weren't doing any work. What options do we have on something like that? I mean, can we put in a contract, we'll pay for the lift, but only if you're actually using it?
Well, usually what we do is, the question is, do we have to pay for the lift if we're not using it? And usually what we do is we get a fixed sum price from the contractors, and we base that on a detailed set of scope documents. We've used Arsee engineers to put together scope documents on a number of projects, and they're usually very thorough. So the bids that we receive are to complete all the work in that scope in a certain period of time, and it's up to the contractor to get that work done in that period of time. Now, there is language in the contract that allows them to extend their time to get it completed if they have bad weather. However, we require them to have a certain number of rain days or bad weather days in their scope of work. And if it goes beyond what's considered reasonably normal, then we are obligated to pay them some additional money. But we want to get that written into the contract up front. The other thing we like to do is if there's additional work that comes up above and beyond what's detailed in the scope documents, is we get unit prices from the contractors before we even sign a contract for them. So if they're up there and it determines that we need to replace more brick than what's detailed on the drawings, we already know what the unit price is for so many bricks that have to be removed. If they have to remove one more brick and replace it, it's let's say $6. So we know what that unit cost is up front, and we can kind of watch over it and anticipate what that cost will be.
Would it be, I'm sure it would cost prohibitive, but I keep hearing the exterior bricks are ruined, basically. What would be the chance we could replace all the exterior bricks maybe in different phases? Because we're going to replace bricks, but yet we've got bricks that we're not going to replace, which means 10 years from now, we're going to look at those, we've got to replace those now, and it seems like it's just going to be an ongoing process.
Well, the question is, do we replace all the bricks now or wait? It will be a very, very costly project to replace the bricks. I believe the Arsee report noted that if we can deal with the tuck pointing, that will go a long way to keeping those existing brick intact for a longer period of time. So what's happening is water is getting in between those bricks in the mortar joints and seeping back behind it, and the freeze-thaw cyclical process that we have here in Indiana is causing those bricks to break down a lot quicker. There are some bricks up there that need to be replaced. They're just crumbling. I don't think it's the entire wall. In the photographs that Arsee engineers put together, I think they identified the real danger spots that need to be addressed.
Didn't they mention that some of the bricks had been replaced, but the wrong size bricks with smaller bricks?
Yeah, smaller and colors that didn't match the existing, which it's difficult to find bricks today that match 150-year-old brick. And it's difficult sometimes to get brick that match the right size. If you work hard enough, you can find it. There are a number of locations where we can find brick that's been taken down from old buildings and repurposed that we can use to put back into these buildings. It takes a little more effort, a little more money to make sure we use the right brick. So.
Any more questions before I ask another redirecting question? Okay, so at this point, I'd like to redirect our discussion to a more practical issue. As somebody who new, never done this kind of major repair like this before, I need to think systematically. What are the steps that I need to do? For example, first thing is you got to establish a committee to oversee the whole project. You may have to establish another committee to do the capital campaign. Now, what are the jobs of these committees? And if they need to hire different groups, different companies, what are we asking them to hire for? So what is the end result? It's a very detailed kind of a question, but if you can't answer it here, then I'll see you at another opportunity and we'll line that up, because as a pastor, I need to have the overall picture in mind of what I'm doing.
Right.
Before I even get my people going. I don't want to start and stop because the order is out of whack.
Sure. Well, that's a good question, Father, on the process that the parish needs to follow to get this project completed. I guess I maybe can address the capital campaign side of it. That might be beneficial. The diocese has a pretty strict policy for parishes that want to conduct a capital campaign. It's not that we don't want parishes to raise money. We do want parishes to raise money, but we want parishes to be successful when they raise money. So if a parish is planning on raising money that's 30% or more of their annual Sunday Holy Day collection or their annual income, the diocese asks that a parish come in and review what they need, what the capital campaign is for, and receive approval from the Archdiocese before that campaign begins. And they want to make sure the parish is successful, So they have a process that they've outlined on how a parish can go about doing a capital campaign. Typically, the first process is you need to develop a vision or a goal of why you're trying to raise the money. This is the beginning of that. These are more what I call deferred maintenance or just general maintenance issues that need to be addressed at the parish. And many of our parishes conduct capital campaigns to address these issues. They're not rosy projects that a lot of people want to give money to. So, yes. Father asked what's the overall process of how to make this thing work, and there are several components here. There's the capital campaign side of it, and then there's the nuts and bolts of how to take this and get it into something that we can then use to get the work done. The capital campaign side usually involves putting a capital campaign committee together of individuals that are willing to work under the direction of a capital campaign consultant to raise the money for the project. The challenging part is going out and making phone calls or knocking on doors of parishioners and asking for the money, but you got to be able to explain the story of why we need the money. And the best way is to put together a case statement that might be just an 8.5 by 11 brochure that defines the case in a written format, in very simple written format, defines the financial aspects of why you need that capital campaign. And through the capital campaign consultant helps you identify the various levels of giving that can be achieved at your parish. And that capital campaign statement is used to get approval from the diocese to conduct a capital campaign. Then you use that statement to go out and help raise the money in your parish. So there's the capital campaign side of it, and then there's nuts and bolts side of it of how this thing works. Typically, this is the nuts and bolts side is there might be a building committee or building renovation committee or building restoration committee. Let me use that word because they're not really renovating. You're doing more restoration work here. Building restoration committee that has experience in with this kind of work, whether it be some architects in the parish or some engineers or some contractors or those who have worked in that arena in the past. And then my office usually then oversees the building side of it, the building committee side or the restoration committee side of it, reviewing these drawings as they're assembled, reviewing the contracts as they're assembled, helping to assemble some contractors that could bid on this project that have done this kind of work and are skilled in this kind of work, and we have a tremendous amount of trust in giving us a good finished product. And then once that contract is negotiated, I spend a lot of my time coming out and overseeing the work as it's going forward to make sure it's being done per the contract documents that contractor has signed off on. So I'm here as a resource. Our Office of Stewardship and Development, under the leadership of Jolinda Moore, helps the parish on the capital campaign side of it. In fact, she's the person that oversees the capital campaign review committee down at the Archdiocese. I have, I think I brought along 7 copies of the capital campaign approval process required for all parishes, schools, and agencies. It's just a 4-page document. I'll let you guys have if you want to review it. It's fairly simple, and it's pretty well outlined in there. Your project would require a capital campaign approval based on the size of this project. And
so let me just, for my little tiny pastoral work, put together what I need to do, at least for the next year. Okay? So put together a committee of people who are familiar with capital campaign and issues of finance. And then that job, the job of that capital campaign committee at the beginning is to work with the diocese to get approval for a capital campaign. Now that means that they may need to hire a consulting company to put together that case
statement.
Case statement, but that's their work.
Yes.
And then once that is, they follow the process outlined here, they get approval for the capital campaign. Then they shifted to a second phase, and they would work with the consultant to do the steps necessary to do the capital campaign.
To raise the money for the, yes, that's correct. Jolinda Moore is probably the first person you want to contact before you even form your committee. She might have more information that would be beneficial to you on how to structure that committee, that capital campaign committee.
Could you repeat, just for the sake of
Sure.
recording,
I'm sorry.
what I need to do for the next year?
So Father Duke is asking what's the process he needs to do for the following year to get this thing moving forward. And the first thing is probably to assemble a capital campaign committee, but call Jolinda Moore, the Executive Director of Office of Stewardship and Development, first, and discuss the need for the campaign. And she will provide she will give you a very detailed outline of what she's recommending you follow to make sure you're successful in assembling that committee and helping you understand the timelines for what she will need to get you onto the agenda at the diocese. We typically, I think the Capital Campaign Review Committee, it meets monthly, sometimes twice a month, depending on the number of projects that need to be reviewed. So that committee is very flexible, trying to meet the needs of the parishes as required. Simultaneously, there probably ought to be this restoration committee that gets assembled that helps assemble the vision or the scope documents on how these various buildings are going to be restored. I'm pausing because I'm trying to figure out how to word this. You have a large campus here, a lot of buildings, a lot of square footage. And we typically design and maintain our buildings to serve the ministries or programs that are being housed in those buildings. When that gets upside down, in which the ministries or programs are serving the buildings, we start having, a parish starts having financial issues. And we want to make sure that your buildings are serving your ministry needs. We have parishes that have determined that they have too many buildings, or their buildings aren't functioning as they should be. So they've started looking at them to determine how can they better serve their ministry needs. Some parishes end up disposing of a building, it's not the proper word I'm looking for, but decide that that building is not something that's going to support their ministries, so they'll sell it off, or sell off that parcel of property, or they'll demolish a building that's not serving their ministry needs, so that they can focus on the buildings that truly are servicing their ministry needs. I don't know if that's something that needs to happen here. I just bring that up as a review process that's healthy for every parish to go through. As an architect, I hate to say we should tear buildings down, because I love historic buildings, and I think historic buildings serve a purpose. We need to make sure that that purpose is truly meeting the purpose of the ministries. So that's probably an analysis that needs to happen. So, and I'm not saying you need to tear any buildings down here, I'm just saying that's probably something the parish needs to look at. Are there buildings that you own that aren't serving your ministries the way they need to be serving them? Can they be modified so they can serve your ministry the way they should be? If they cannot, what are our options?
I think that's a proper question to address the pastoral council. And that's where we're beginning to engage in the process of looking at the pastoral plan for the diocese and realigning ourselves so that it matches both from the mission statement to the goals that are set in the pastoral letter. And so we're looking at that, and so we're beginning to look at building, like, okay, if we have this vision of what we're going to do to support, let's just say one of the goals there is congregated consecrated life. In the booklet it says clerical life. But for us, we want to expand that a little bit. But the main idea is if that's one of the goals, how can we use our facility as well too for those purposes? So I'm just using that as an example.
Sure.
So we're engaging in that now. So I understand what you're saying, and we're going to be doing all of that.
And some parishes have found that by selling off property, they can generate income to help maintain the existing buildings or existing properties that they want to retain that serve their ministries. So reducing sometimes is beneficial to help us maintain what we have.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to redirect again.
Captial Campaign Consultant, are we tied into my plan, or?
Is the parish tied into one specific capital campaign consultant? No. Joe Lindemore has a list of companies that other parishes have used successfully, some that have been used successfully, some that have not been used successfully. Many times it depends on who within that company a parish receives as their leader. But there are some very good companies out there, some here locally and some in some of the outlying cities, whether it be Chicago, Cincinnati, Louisville. But there are some really good ones here locally that can do capital campaign consulting. I'd recommend you not choose the lowest priced one. I do the research through Jolinda's guidance and talk to other parishes that have had success with capital campaign consultants and find out who's led them down a successful path.
What should we look at as far as expected cost?
Oh gosh, what's an expected capital campaign consultant cost? It usually is. I will tell you, Jolinda Moore's office has directed some parishes to conduct a feasibility study before they actually begin the capital campaign. And the feasibility study is to determine, is it feasible for this parish to raise money, and what's the realistic conservative goal that they could raise, and what's kind of a stretch goal that they could raise. And they do that through meeting with certain individuals in the parish and doing some dialogue with them, and then making some phone calls, and then looking at the financial records of the parish and looking at previous capital campaigns or previous financial campaigns the parish has had in the past to determine how successful could they be in raising money. And then from that information, it helps the parish then tailor their capital campaign. I will say, Jolinda's office has backed off in requiring every parish to have a feasibility study, just because it's an additional amount of money you got to pay for the feasibility study, then you got to pay an additional amount to actually conduct the capital campaign. I think it's been our experience that the capital campaign is anywhere from 8 to 10% of the money you're trying to raise, which to me seems like a heck of a lot of money. But if they're successful, and if maybe you can factor that into the amount that needs to be raised so you can raise a little bit more than that, and they're successful in helping you raise that money, that's money well spent.
What should we expect from the capital campaign company? Will they handle like mailings, printings, or is it just going to be basically to tell you what you guys need to do, and then we do the mailings?
I think they do the mailings. I think they do the printings. They help draft the case statement that goes out in those mailings. They help you identify the levels of giving that you can expect in the parish, and from what individuals' level of giving you can probably expect. Some of that comes from the parish records, but that capital campaign consultant looks at those records and is able to decipher some way, maybe through a magic ball, I don't know, who's going to give a certain dollar amount. They have rules of thumb, I think. From our rule of thumb, it's been our experience that when a parish conducts a capital campaign, they can usually raise anywhere from 3 to 4.5 times the parish's Holy Day Sunday giving. So if you're at $500,000 now, you can raise 3 to 3.5, 4.5 times that amount for your campaign if it's put together well and the right timing.
So we better go with the best company, not the least expensive.
Yes. Yes.
Yep, exactly.
Yes, you do. You do.
Any other questions before I redirect?
Do we get your cell phone number with
Don't worry.
It's my personal phone.
broadcasting it?
I'm going to actually sit down with him very soon here to ask the question that I wanted to ask him, which is a very detailed list of what the pastor needs to do. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I'm redirecting right now because I know that many of you are from the Chapel Refreshment Committee, and that this area of building from repairing from the top down and from the outside in is very important to them because they're basically refreshing this chapel as a way to begin to celebrate 2025, which is our Jubilee year.
Okay.
It will be 150 years. And so we want to make the parish look vibrant and slowly move our parishioners into thinking this is a major step milestone for us. And we're doing various things. So I don't think at this point we should paint the wall. This is not the time for that. I just want your take on that. And the second is that we're thinking about the flooring, so replacing the floor, and certainly the furniture can be taken a look at. So is it precise to say hold off at this point for painting the wall?
So for the sake of this videotaping, Father wants to know, should he proceed forward with the interior renovation of this chapel, or should we hold off until we address the outside components first? My recommendation is you will hold off on doing anything major on the inside here until the outside of this building is made as weather resistant as possible. I know there's some shingles up on this roof that are missing, are quite aged. There's some flashing issues, specifically I think down in this section, that might be causing some of that plaster damage up there that ought to be addressed before you do any work in here. There's a church on the east side, near east side of Indianapolis, that did a significant renovation on the inside, and we encourage them not to because there was significant water infiltration coming inside from throughout the envelope, and the parish decided to proceed forward, which that's their decision, but it was unfortunate, and it's
furniture replacement and floor replacement is okay.
Floor coverings.
as long as it's not being damaged by any moisture infiltration from these walls. Are you looking at just replacing carpeting here?
Right. We're thinking about actually even going a laminate product.
Oh, okay.
And then the furniture, basically, we would replace the upholstery, tighten them up, maybe.
Is there wood under here?
Yeah.
Very, very light, right, Ron?
Yes. Yeah, Kevin recommended the carpet squares, which we had examples, I think, in the other room. We've been working with Kevin Studley, so.
Oh, okay, Aventios.
He's been out, he's got them all together, but stopped everything until after this meeting here.
Okay, okay, okay. I wouldn't do any painting of the ceiling or the walls.
Part of the reason of stopping the painting is because we have to repair these cracks anyways.
Yeah. I guess I need to give some more thought to this, Father. If you're going to do renovation work in here, the flooring is the last thing you'd probably end up putting down. You'd want to start doing the renovation, the painting or repair work up high and work your way down, and then put the floor down as the very last thing. So if you put the floor down now, it's going to potentially get damaged as you start doing the renovation work on the walls and up above. So I'd hold off on doing anything here. You could replace furniture, yeah, that could be moved in and out as required. But the challenge with furniture is you may not get the same color. You may not same color coordination between the fabric on the chair that you're trying to get with the carpeting, because carpeting colors change all the time.
We have a consulting company that can give us the schema know what kind of flooring we want before we, at the same time that we want to change the furniture. So I don't think we need to wait off on the furniture much more because we just, I'm trying to simplify the work of the refreshment committee and get something moving at this point.
Okay.
So I think the,
Well, furniture would be a safe move on.
yeah.
Got a question on that. Are we going to do all of the chairs? Because we've got these chapel chairs, but then we've got chairs there, chairs on the altar. We doing them all?
I would imagine so. If you're gonna do a set, do a set. I live in a friary and I don't get the eclecticness of having 5 different types of spoons, 3 different types of forks. It's
Right.
okay.
It's in a family life too.
Okay.
Yes,
Is there
Does the capital campaign go on simultaneously with applying for grants? You mentioned some grants that we might have. Or is that like step 2? I mean, wouldn't that be happening at the same time where?
Can you apply for grants while you're doing the campaign or applying to do the
Does
campaign?
it happen at the same time?
Yes, they can. Yes, that process can happen at the same time. The Center for Congregation Grants are only grants that can be used for professional services. They do not give money to implement the work. So if you were to hire someone like Arsee engineers to take this assessment and put it together in a detailed set of drawings and specifications that could be used to be bid out to contractors, that would be a grant you could apply. You could apply for a grant from them to help fund that scope of work. But to actually implement this with a contractor, Center for Congregations does not provide grants for that work. Now, there may be historical groups out there that do.
But then with the historical group, we're bound by their restrictions as far as what we can.
Sometimes, yes. I will tell you that St. Mary's downtown, you've probably seen the scaffolding in front of the church. They're doing a massive masonry restoration project on the front of their church. And they applied for a Sacred Spaces grant and have been tentatively awarded a grant. St. Joan of Arc did the same thing several years ago. They've not received their money at St. Joan of Arc because they've not completed that work. It's basically restoration of the exterior windows on the upper portion of St. Joan of Arc. But they're usually matching dollars. Both of those projects, I don't think, required the parishes to commit to anything that the diocese would object to. So it's not like we had to put the buildings on the National Register or guarantee we would never close these buildings or tear them down. I don't believe there's anything like that.
We seem to be very afraid of putting this building on the National Historic Register. Why? Why would we be afraid to do that if it would enhance our ability to get grants?
I think we looked at that once before. This was maybe 25 years ago.
I don't think it enhances our ability.
It limits our ability to do things like put in a bathroom. Or
I mean, you could list this building in the National Historic Register, and it's just a plaque that goes on the outside that says this is a historically significant building. But from what I've read on their application process, there's nothing there that says by placing that building on the National Register, you're prevented from doing anything. It just lists that building as historically significant. Now, if you were to apply for some federal grants that have money attached to them that prevent you from changing anything on the outside or potentially tearing the building down at some point, that could potentially become an issue. Yeah.
You seem like we're at such a negative with us. It's like, even if they were to say, don't change anything on the outside, it's like, we wouldn't. There's nothing to change on the outside.
Right.
What resources would be available from the diocese itself?
Good question, Father. What resources are available from the diocese? The diocese has a grant program that parishes are welcome to apply for twice a year. And for this project you're looking at, it would probably be the Scott grant. A gentleman, none of us really know him, he donated property up in Tippecanoe and Benton County and a county over in Illinois that was farmland that he had put together from many, many years ago that was being used to support his handicapped son. And when his son died, that land reverted back to the diocese, or reverted to the diocese. And we took that land and sold it in auction, and a portion of the money we received from that auction has gone into an endowment, and we take the interest off that endowment twice a year and distribute it out to parishes that are in need of capital projects. Typically, the diocese wants it to be kind of a one-for-one. So the parish has raised money, and let's say you've raised $1 million, apply for the grant, see if you can get a matching amount. I will tell you, the diocese does not have enough money to match $1 million grant. It's usually about $400,000, $500,000 twice a year that becomes available through this grant process. And they try to just to the entire diocese, to those that apply each twice a year. So a parish has to submit an application, list the need, attach to that need the quotes from the various contractors that have submitted quotes, attach the parish financial statement, and then it goes before a review committee that's made up of priests, some administrators from agencies outside the diocese, and then there's several of us from the staff that sit in as more or less consultants to that committee that reviews these grants. So you, depending on how much you ask for and then how much other parishes are asking for during that cycle, yeah, that's available. I don't know of any other grant opportunities in the diocese other than that.
If you apply, let's say we apply first 6 months of next year, and we don't get it for whatever reason, does our application automatically go over to the next 6 months, or do we have to apply again?
You have to reapply. You have to reapply, yes. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Just a quick question on this. What is the diocese's viewpoint on the dreaded word of loan? Because we need sometimes just enough loan to get the project completed. Basically,
sure.
What's the loan issue?
What's the loan process or rules? The diocese has a loan program for these type of capital projects. The process is you typically have to have 50% of the money in cash for the project and the other 50% in verifiable pledges. So let's say this is a $2 million project, you raise $1 million in cash, you got an additional $1 million still to come in pledges. You can apply for a loan, and the diocese would more than likely give you a loan for $1 million to go ahead and implement the program, with the understanding that once those remaining $1 million in pledges came in, you would pay back the loan. Now there's also interest tied to that loan. It's not an interest-free loan. However, we have found that the interest rate is much better for these projects than than a parish were to go out and try and get their own loan. Basically, what you're doing is you are borrowing money from other parishes in the diocese. They all pool their money into a common diocesan bank, if you will. They each have their own account, but you're borrowing against other parishes, and then you're paying those parishes back through the loan process. It's worked very successfully. St. John Paul II down in Sellersburg is building a brand new church, $6 million church. They're using it. Holy Spirit on the east side is doing a $4 million expansion renovation project. They're using some funds from it. St. Mary's, I think they applied for the loan, they were approved for the loan, but they've not drawn on the loan. Their pledge money's been coming in. St. Luke's up on the north side is doing the same thing, but they're not drawing on the loan at this point. They're just using the money as the pledges come in to pay for the scope of work that needs to be done. So yes, you can borrow against it. You can borrow money to complete the project. And it's a very good way to get the project going sooner than later.